Since 1980, the Newcastle City Council has contributed $1 million towards cycleways. State and federal government funds for the same period total $1.1 million. Projects about to begin include the construction of a cycleway on McCaffrey Drive at Rankin Park, from the Lookout Road to Elbrook Drive. Cycleways are also being built at Scenic Drive at Merriweather and on Maitland Road at Mayfield, between Maud Street and Wallsend Road. More cycleways are planned for the future. It's been suggested part of the Redhead Coal Company railway line from Belmont to Adamstown be converted to a cycleway. Newcastle and Lake Macquarie City Councils will discuss the idea.
Newcastle Council has recognised that this is a major possible route for tourism in the future, and also identified the possibility of this route making an ideal cycleway between Newcastle and Belmont.
Lake Macquarie and Newcastle City Councils, in conjunction with the State Bicycle Committee, are also negotiating with the Gretley Colliery to convert an easement over the disused tramway line between Wallsend and Glendale. The Newcastle City Council is also looking at the possibility of an off-road cycleway at Katara between Northcote Drive and Park Avenue. A major off-road cycleway in association with the construction of State Highway 23 at Jesmond between Newcastle Road and Rankin Drive is also being considered. Good afternoon, I'm Belinda Borissow. Tonight I'll be reporting on plans for a $3 million extension at the Ex-Services Memorial Centre at Bolton Point. 40 new hostel units should be built by the beginning of next year.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
For the United Caravan and Campers Association, having their own office is a real milestone. Up until now, they've been forced to operate out of individuals' homes. But today they were officially given the key to their new office, located in the bowels of Trades Hall. Despite their underground location, the organisation is thrilled.
And on behalf of the Trades Hall Council, I feel very privileged to give this key to you, Ferry, and to the organisation. And I'm sure you'll carry on the battle on behalf of the people you represent.
In January 1987, legislation made it legal to live in caravan parks permanently. This was considered a major step forward by the organisation. But according to State President of the Caravan and Campers Association, George Paris, there are many more battles still to fight.
Well, the main issues are pretty bread and butter things to the people in the parks. They're concerned about holes in the road, they're concerned about the fact they haven't got a telephone, they're concerned about the lighting, they're concerned about their toilets. Pretty simple, basic concerns that almost anybody has in any home. We're also pushing on to try and get tenancy and consumer rights, which is still in the maybe stage. We are hoping that they will become effective before the end of this year.
Carrying colourful banners and chanting protests, the Year 11 and 12 students from Swansea High say they fear the worst in possible budget cuts to education. The students are particularly worried about proposed cutbacks to double marking of HSC exam papers and increases in student-teacher ratios. But this is just the top of a long list of complaints for the Minister, Dr Metherell. Spokesperson Tracy Drinkwater says students also fear cuts in ancillary staff at high schools and a possible mixing of years 11 and 12. New TAFE College administrative charges are also being opposed.
Who is this protest aimed at today?
It's aimed at the Liberal government, I'd say, most of all, and to anyone and to the community, because we want everyone to see that we're not just troublesome kids out to cause a bit of trouble and have a day off school. We're kids who care about our education and our future.
Tomorrow at 1 p.m. in Civic Park, students will be holding another demonstration.
Homicide detectives are trying to establish a motive for the callous shooting of a 39-year-old horsebreaker from Wyong. Police say the killer waited in ambush for his victim before blasting him to death with a shotgun.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
In Australia, the incidence of hospital admissions and fatal attacks due to asthma has increased during recent years.
There's been a slow, steady increase in asthma deaths over the last few years, and it's the same sort of pattern. When you take one individual, it's very clear why that person died, and it's usually that they broke the rules. But why suddenly a whole lot more people are breaking the rules than did before is quite a mystery.
But in the past 10 days, ambulance officers in the Hunter have reported an alarming trend of severe attacks throughout the district, in 5 cases resulting in death.
If you're talking about a mini epidemic just over a few weeks, then I think you have to look at the viruses that are around at the moment, or the mycoplasma epidemic that's on, because that does cause people a lot of coughing, and it could make asthmatics much more susceptible to a severe attack.
While theories abound, no one is sure what triggers asthma attacks. But according to Professor Sutherland, death can be avoided if treatment is sought early enough.
Get good medical attention. Use the preventative medicines like Intel, Becotide, Alderson, and don't ignore the warning. Waking at night, interfering with activities, increased use of puffers, an attack that you can't shift. These kind of things are warning signals. And if they're heeded, people needn't die.
Launched at the Newcastle Taxation Office today by Deputy Commissioner of Taxation Bill Mulheron, the new program, Tax Help, is designed to help the less fortunate members of our community.
It's aimed at helping those people in those disadvantaged groups, the elderly, the handicapped, people who on low incomes, to understand their tax obligations. I'm sure that there's been a need, and what we're trying to do is redress that need.
The Taxation Office has recruited 60 Newcastle volunteers plus 30 students from the Hunter Institute of Higher Education to work in the scheme. After undertaking 20 hours of training, the volunteers will be working in their local areas during July and August, offering free, personalised advice for the disadvantaged on how to fill in their tax returns. The program has been a great success overseas, and Bill Mulheron says there's every indication it will work here as well.
We've undertaken a pilot here for the tax organisation, and we hope and we're sure that the success of it will see it being extended throughout Australia next year.
The Dairy Farmers Co-op is worth an estimated $60 million with an annual turnover of $260 million. Its factories service milk producers from Lismore to Albury. However, the co-op is now embroiled in a major civil war. Fearing that cooperatives were falling into the control of outside interests, the previous state government introduced legislation forcing non-active members to forfeit their shares. That ruling was implemented by the Dairy Farmers Co-op at a meeting in Newcastle several months ago. Now the non-producing dairymen, called dries, are fighting back. Under the government guidelines, the co-op is only obliged to purchase their shares at $2 each. That has angered many shareholders who say their shares are worth almost $12 and were being offered $5 a share by giant food companies and Finder at Riga. And Finder has received options on more than 2 million shares and has been criticised for trying to take control of the co-op, a suggestion dismissed by the company's general manager, Jeff Giuradini.
Well, it's patently nonsense. We can go to 20%, but even with 20%, which is about 600,000 shares, we still only have one vote. So it's impossible to control the co-op from that position.
Padella are taking the board of dairy farmers to court for refusing to register their shares, and now the smaller holders are also fighting back. Last night, almost 100 attended a meeting at East Maitland and voted to send representatives to the Minister for Consumer Affairs, Jerry Peacock, to fight the ruling. The dry shares were due to be forfeited tomorrow, but following representations to the Minister, they were granted 3 weeks' grace. Organiser of the meeting, Jim Tuttenham, says they have no wish to control the co-op. $12 million Ferry, one of the biggest vessels ever constructed by Carrington Slipways, was launched in dramatic style in April. But while over time in the calm water of the river, the Coleroy now has to prove herself in far more trying conditions. Before handing the ferry over to its buyer, the Urban Transport Authority, Carrington Slipways is obliged to carry out exhaustive tests on its equipment and performance, tests which were to be conducted at this week's sea trials. However, today's conditions were a lot to ask of any vessel. With winds gusting up to 48 knots and the swell rising above 3 metres, the trials were aborted and the ferry brought back to the calm of the port. Although the conditions were worse than any ferry would normally operate in, the Coleroy is better equipped than most to handle them. It is the first Sydney ferry to be fitted with stabilisers, enormous paddles which may be extended from each side to combat roll. According to the Coleroy's skipper, Dave Stimson, the stabilisers had ample opportunity to prove themselves this morning.
Well, once they came into effect, yes, it made the ride a little bit more comfortable. It's very noticeable about a quarter of an hour after we had them in, or out, sorry, I should say, initially. They were brought in and the ship went through some fairly heavy rolls. So we got them out again very, very quickly to bring them into operation so that we had a far more comfortable ride.
But while the conditions outside put paid to most of the trials, there was still room inside the harbour to test manoeuvrability. With propellers at either end, the Coleroy can go closer to turning on a dime than most other ocean-going vessels its size. The sea trials will continue as soon as the weather and seas permit.
The National Liaison Committee met this afternoon to consider the tribunal orders, which had been circulated to rank and file members in New South Wales and Queensland. Their response was unanimous. They would continue their strike for 7 days. The National Liaison Committee will officially give the tribunal its decision tomorrow. Meanwhile, federal and Queensland government calls for the axing of the Coal Industry Tribunal have won support from the New South Wales Premier Nick Greiner. The Premier says the tribunal has been unsuccessful and says the coalition doesn't support special industry tribunals operating outside the mainstream arbitration system.
Kelly and the city of bees has nothing to do with Australia's popular bushranger and his demise. It's the story instead of a little boy who by coincidence also happens to be called Ned Kelly. Ned goes into hospital for a minor operation and dreams that he visits a city of bees. He meets the queen bee, the drones and a little girl who's been brought up by the bees. The play is on at the Roxy Theatre until Saturday and is particularly suitable for primary school children. For many in the cast, this production is not their first. They're old hands who believe strongly that live theatre is lots more fun than staying at home and watching TV or videos.
What's it like? Is it nerve-wracking being in plays like this?
Well, your first play is because you don't know what to expect from the audience and how they're going to react. But after a few shows, you get used to getting off the stage and learning your lines.
And so you're all pretty old hands, is that right?
Yeah, we've done a few shows.
I reckon there's 30 people here.
Members of 4 railway unions will stop work from 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to coordinate a campaign opposing the SRA's plans for the railways. Among proposals rejected by the unions are any moves to privatise the rail service, rationalisation of depots and workshops and the elimination of small freight handling. Jobs are already threatened at railway stations. The unions say positions like that of ticket collector at the barriers are earmarked for abolition. Unions say many more jobs will be lost if country rail services are cut. Hunter railway workers are part of the northern area of the Railways Union, which includes more than 1/3 of all members in the state. Despite the stop work, rail services won't be disrupted.
Anyone who is required to keep a train operated from a station assistant to a driver will remain at work so as the travelling public will not be hurt in any way.
The stop work has been condemned by State Rail management as a futile gesture. They say it will affect some booking offices and barriers, and passengers who can't buy tickets before boarding may join trains and, if possible, tender fares at the end of the journey.
The Minister for Sport, Recreation and Racing, Bob Rowland-Smith, has approved in principle a $200,000 grant towards the cost of providing lighting at the ground. It is estimated the total cost of the new lights is $428,000. President of the Newcastle Rugby League and the Newcastle Knights, Max Fox, said today that the last Minister, Mike Cleary, had offered the ISC $300,000 towards lighting, substantially more than Mr Rowland-Smith's offer.
Well, the new proposal, which was conveyed to us this week by letter from the Minister, was that we have a $200,000 grant towards the lighting of the International Sports Centre. That would be lighting sufficient to give us TV coverage for night games. The original proposal outlined by the former Minister was a $200,000 grant, plus a further $100,000 from another source of funding, which I didn't ask him where it was from or what it was from. He just assured me that it was there. So we intend to write back to the Minister and say the former Minister publicly announced a grant of $200,000, but he later, or he had earlier, and then confirmed it to me that there was an additional $100,000 coming from his department. Well, we have any number of witnesses to that statement, and we'll be asking the Minister to reconsider finding that other $100,000.
$650,000 of state government grants have already been spent on the ground, plus over $1 million of the night's money. Max says in this standard of football, night games are becoming more popular and permanent lighting is a must.
How much money do you think you have lost up until now without having lights at the International Sports Centre?
Well, the most easily calculated debt was the loss of the Panasonic game against Eastern Suburbs. We would have made at least $25,000.
Mr Allright's address came on day 3 of the conference, which brought together more than 500 farmer delegates from across the state. The National Farmers Federation battles major organisations on behalf of farmers, a role that has attacked with vigour in the past. Its profile hit an all-time high 2 years ago when 45,000 angry farmers converged on Parliament House to protest against government farming policies. However, the Federation's longest-running battle is with the dockside unions. Former President Ian McLaughlin started the campaign in 1978 when he led producers onto the Adelaide docks to load their own livestock when a strike threatened exports. New President John Allwright is considered less militant, but took the opportunity at the conference to make it clear he also expects change.
And you reach a point where it's between evolution and revolution, and I think the point we're on is about evolution, but not over centuries. We're on about evolution fairly quickly.
And part of that evolution could be farmers running their own dockside operations. Mr Allwright announced that the NFF is considering setting up a stevedoring company to combat union power on the waterfront.
What we would like to see, and what we have always wanted to see, is comparable work performance on the waterfront, not with Panama or somewhere, but with nations of comparable living standards to the ones we have. And we are not achieving that at the moment.
While the Waterside Workers Federation has not condemned the NFF proposal, Assistant General Secretary Leo Lanane says it will not tolerate any breaches of union regulations. Earlier, Mr Lanane warned that the union would not stand for what he called the NFF's strong-arm tactics.
Somebody's got to do something about the waterfront. We acknowledge that. There's got to be an attitudinal change, but it won't be by somebody sinking the boot into us.